The aurora's veil cut through Andara's upper atmosphere like a silver blade, leaving behind a trail of iridescent ionized particles that shimmered in the fading light of twin suns. From orbit, the planet below seemed alive, a kaleidoscope of emerald jungles, sprawling crystal cities, and neon rivers snaking across deserts of rose-gold sand. Orbital satellites and human alien warships glinted like scattered jewels, a testament to centuries of uneasy coexistence. Debra Solari stood on the bridge of her ship, her posture flawless, the lines of her silver-plated tunic hugging her figure in a perfect balance of elegance and authority. Her hair, silver like starlight, flowed down her shoulders in soft waves, catching the reflection of the twin suns. Her emerald eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the planet with an intensity that made even the most seasoned crew uneasy. "This is it," she murmured, her voice low, confident, yet edged with a subtle thrill. Andara, fragile, divided, ripe for change. Her hand brushed the edge of a holoscreen, and a three-dimensional map of the planet's capital blossomed into view, glowing faintly in the dim light of the bridge. She traced the jagged lines of the city's power zones, the alien monarchy's bastions, human merchant districts, and the hidden rebel enclaves that whispered of unrest. Every detail was a potential advantage, every weakness a door waiting to be unlocked. The crew held their breaths as the starship descended toward the sprawling palace city of Veyrathis. The towering crystalline spires of the palace pierced the sky, their surfaces shifting colors like liquid metal reflecting the alien architecture's chaotic beauty. Hovering guards patrolled the approaches, scanning every ship, every shadow. Debra's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. Beauty, she knew, was one of the deadliest weapons in a universe built on power and perception. A glance, a tilt of the head, the faintest arch of an eyebrow. These could open doors, dissolve suspicions, or turn enemies against one another before a single word was spoken. And she intended to wield it with precision. As the aurora's veil touched down, in the palace's orbital docking bay, the hum of energy fields and grav lifts filled the air. Courtiers, alien nobles, and palace stewards began to gather, their gazes drifting toward the ship. Whispers rippled like electric currents through the crowd. "She is magnificent, radiant, dangerous." Debra stepped onto the transparent docking platform, her boots making no sound as she walked. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, magnetic. Even the stoic alien guards, their scaled faces unreadable, couldn't hide the flicker of awe or unease in their eyes. Every observer registered her presence, from the merchant delegates eyeing potential alliances to the spies lurking in us. Shadows. Her eyes swept the crowd, assessing, calculating. Every subtle expression, every furtive glance became a data point. Andara was a world of shifting loyalties, centuries-old grudges, and fragile peace. To conquer it, one needed more. Than weapons, one needed insight, charm, and ruthlessness in equal measure. Debra had all three. A senior steward approached, bowing low. "Lady Solari, welcome to Veyrathis. Lord Veyr requests your presence in the Central Council chamber." Debra's smile deepened, a spark of challenge lighting her eyes. "Tell him I come with respect and ambition," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying over the murmurs of the crowd, "and that I intend to see the future of Andara with my own eyes." As she walked toward the palace, the grand doors reflecting the colors of alien crystal, she felt the thrill of the game settling in her bones. Here, beauty was not a distraction. It was a weapon. Charm was currency. Intellect was armor, and ambition. Ambition was the sharpest blade of all. The doors parted with a hiss, and the vast chamber beyond revealed itself, a kaleidoscope of a light, color, and political tension. Nobles of every shape and hue whispered to one another, their gazes darting, their alliances fragile. This was Debra's arena, a living web of intrigue where a single misstep could be fatal, or a single smile could shift the balance of power for centuries. She stepped forward, every eye on her, every mind calculating, and in that instant, the game of crowns and deception began. This version immerses the reader in the futuristic world, showcases Debra's allure and cunning, and sets the stage for political intrigue, espionage, and her ambition. The central chamber of Veyrathis was a cathedral of alien opulence, its crystalline walls pulsing with a living light that shifted in rhythm with the heartbeat of the palace. Suspended platforms glimmered with bioluminescent vines, and streams of air shimmered around hovering servants carrying trays of iridescent delicacies. Every detail was a testament to centuries of alien artistry and centuries of carefully maintained power. Debra Solari moved among the nobles like a whisper of starlight, her presence impossible to ignore. Even the most hardened alien faces, the angular, scaled features of the Kaleth dynasty, or the smooth glass-like skin of the Nusari emissaries, bent slightly toward her as if drawn by a gravitational pull of allure. Every step she took was deliberate, a calculated display of elegance and dominance. From the corner of her eye, she noted the subtle shifts in posture, the twitch of a claw, the flicker of irises, tiny tells of fear, desire, and ambition. This court was a living puzzle, and she intended to dismantle it piece by piece. A group of human diplomats lingered near a cluster of violet spires. Debra approached, her voice smooth as liquid silver. "Greetings," she said, inclining her head slightly. "I trust Andara has been welcoming?" One of the diplomats, a tall man with a scar tracing his jawline, smiled nervously. "As welcoming as it can be, Lady Solari. The court has its complexities." Debra's smile deepened, faint and knowing. "Complexity is a language I speak fluently. Tell me, who among them is most dissatisfied with the current order?" The man hesitated, glancing at the alien nobles, then leaned closer. "There are whispers, small ones but persistent. Some feel Lord Veyra's rule is too rigid, that the monarchy clings to tradition while the world moves forward." She let the words linger, letting a faint glimmer of amusement touch her eyes. "Ah," she said softly, "change is always seductive, especially when delivered by someone capable of wielding it." Across the chamber, a hush rippled through a circle of alien nobles. Debra's emerald gaze found them, analyzing. The quiet Nisari woman with hidden ambition, the young Kaleth cousin, eager for recognition, the veteran advisor whose loyalty was bought with centuries of prestige. Each had a thread of desire, weakness, or fear. Each could be guided or broken. Her attention shifted as a low murmur reached her ears. Two court spies exchanged data pads, their voices barely audible above the hum of hovering lights. Debra approached with effortless grace. "Curious," she said, her tone soft but pointed. "Data is power, yes? And yet you seem eager to hide yours." The spies faltered, their pupils widening. Debra's smile was subtle, almost innocuous, but it carried the sharpness of a drawn blade. "Do not mistake observation for intrusion. I simply wish to understand the currents of this court." By the end of the evening, Debra had planted the seeds of her strategy. A whispered word here, a flirted glance there, a calculated compliment to the influential, and a shadow of doubt cast upon the complacent. Every move was a small incursion into the fragile web of alliances that held the palace together. The night's final test came in the form of a message, an invitation from Lord Veyra himself. The holographic seal flickered, projecting his tall, imposing figure in the center of the chamber. His scaled features were inscrutable, his eyes dark pools of centuries of calculation. "Lady Solari," he said, voice smooth as obsidian, "your arrival has been noted. Come, let us speak of the future." Debra's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the arena in which she thrived, a battlefield not of weapons, but of wits, influence, and subtle seduction. She allowed a small, deliberate smile to curve her lips. "Of course," she replied, her tone measured. "I would be most eager to discuss how the future might unfold together." As she followed the hologram's instructions, moving toward the private council chambers, she felt the thrill of the game settle into her bones. Every word spoken tonight, every glance exchanged, every secret overheard, would be a tool, each one sharpening her path to the throne. Debra Solari, radiant and unyielding, was no longer merely a guest in Veyrathis. She was a storm gathering. In the palace corridors, a whisper in the ears of conspirators, a shadow in the hearts of those who believed themselves untouchable. And she had only just begun. This chapter builds intrigue, court politics, and Debra's manipulative brilliance while showcasing her beauty as a tool of power. The tension with Lord Veyr and the subtle alliances set the stage for later betrayal and strategic moves. The palace of Veyrathis shimmered like liquid crystal under the light of Andara's twin suns, but inside, shadows coiled like living things. Debra Solari stepped into the grand gala hall, a cascade of her silver hair catching the illumination, of floating chandeliers made from suspended, luminescent crystals. Every gaze fell upon her, every whisper carried across the vast chamber. She moved like a current of starlight, magnetic, poised, deadly in her elegance. The gala was a celebration of diplomacy, a masquerade of alliances where secrets were exchanged as casually as glasses of luminescent wine. Alien nobles with elongated limbs and translucent skin glided beside human ambassadors, their voices lilting in languages she did not yet fully understand, but she did not need translation. Power spoke in the curve of a smile, the twitch of a fingertip, the subtle narrowing of an eye. Debra's emerald gaze scanned the crowd. Among them were the key players she would need to manipulate, the Nasari emissary, eyes gleaming with latent ambition, a Khaleth cousin, restless and eager for recognition, and Veyr's own chief advisor, a tall figure whose loyalty had the sheen of centuries but the cracks of human desire. Each had a thread she could tug. A server approached, bowing, and offered a crystal flute filled with a swirling golden liquid. Debra accepted with a gracious tilt of her head, lips brushing the rim. She allowed her eyes to meet those of Veyr across the room, and a shiver of tension passed through the crowd, as if the air itself had recognized the duel about to unfold. Veyr descended from an elevated dais, his imposing silhouette framed against the glowing palace walls. His presence was magnetic, terrifying, and intoxicating. The hall seemed to tighten around him. Whispers fell silent. Debra's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. Here was the first true test of the game she had come to play. "Lady Solari," Veyr's voice cut through the air like polished obsidian, smooth yet edged with centuries of caution and cunning. "Your reputation precedes you. I am intrigued and cautious." Debra smiled, a small calculated curve of lips that suggested innocence, yet hinted at danger. "And I, Lord Veyr, am equally intrigued by the subtle cracks in a seemingly perfect empire." Her words were like silk wrapped around a dagger, soft, beguiling, and precise. As the gala proceeded, Debra subtly sowed seeds of doubt and intrigue. A whispered compliment to one ambitious noble, a carefully pointed question to another, a faint flicker of sympathy toward a human diplomat, all designed to draw allies to her while creating suspicion around Veyr's court. But the palace was not merely a stage for diplomacy, it was a nest of hidden blades. Halfway through the evening, Debra felt it, a subtle disturbance in the air, the faintest flicker of energy beneath the crystalline floor. She caught the movement in the corner of her eye, a figure, cloaked and silent, moving with lethal precision toward her. Her instincts, honed over years of survival and strategy, flared to life. With a subtle pivot of her wrist, she activated a microshield embedded in her tunic. The attack, A dart tipped with a neurotoxin struck harmlessly against the shimmer of protective energy. The would-be assassin stumbled, eyes wide, exposed. Debra's emerald gaze swept the room, locking with Veyrathis across the hall. He raised a single brow, half surprise, half challenge. The duel of influence had escalated into a deadly dance of life and death, and Debra had shown she was no mere guest. She was a storm, and the court had yet to understand the force it faced. With a languid grace, she allowed herself a soft sigh, masking adrenaline as amusement. "How entertaining," she murmured under her breath, letting the words drift only to herself and the shadows. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle action tonight would feed the coming conquest. The gala ended with applause for the palace's hosts, but Debra's mind was elsewhere. She had survived her first test, uncovered a thread of conspiracy, and sent a clear message. She was not to be underestimated. Allies and enemies alike would learn soon enough that beauty, intelligence, and ambition could strike harder than any weapon. And as the doors of the chamber closed behind her, sealing her in a corridor of glittering shadows and whispering walls, Debra allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She was alive, radiant, untouchable. And the game of the throne had only just begun. This chapter escalates danger, shows Debra's brilliance in navigating both social and physical threats, and deepens her tension with Veyrathis. It also lays the foundation for the intrigue and betrayals to come. The first light of Andara's dawn spilled across the crystalline city, painting the palace in molten gold, yet inside the corridors remained shadowed, humming with the pulse of whispered schemes and hidden agendas. Debra Solari moved through the palace with a predator's grace, each step measured, each glance calculated. The night's assassination attempt had left ripples of tension that she intended to exploit. Her first stop was the human enclave within, the court, merchants, diplomats, and exiles who had long felt the weight of alien rule pressing against them. Debra entered their hall quietly, allowing her silver hair to cascade around her like starlight, every eye drawn instinctively to her presence. Even in subdued morning light, she exuded authority and allure, the combination of intellect and beauty impossible to ignore. "You called for me?" she asked softly, her voice a velvet weapon. A tall, broad-shouldered human, his scar tracing the line of his jaw, stepped forward. "Lady Solari, we've heard whispers. You survived the gala unscathed and unbroken." His tone held admiration and fear. "The court is complicated. We could help you, but only if you can survive its treacheries." Debra's emerald eyes sparkled with calculated amusement. "I do not merely survive, I thrive. But I need allies who understand the game, who know when to bend and when to strike." Her smile was disarming, yet it carried the weight of unspoken challenge. "Can I count on you?" The human inclined his head, a silent promise of loyalty. Yet, even as she accepted it, Debra's mind raced, calculating vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and the possibility of betrayal. Allies in a court were rarely without ulterior motives. Her next focus was the alien nobility, Nisari and Kaleth alike. Debra approached a Nisari emissary, a striking woman with translucent violet skin and eyes like molten silver. "I hear dissatisfaction runs quietly through your circles," Debra said, voice soft, persuasive, curling around the alien's attention like smoke. "Perhaps it is time for change, for a voice that understands both human ambition and alien tradition." The Nisari's pupils dilated. "Your words, they are dangerous, Lady Solari." "Danger is a tool," Debra replied, letting a faint smile touch her lips. "Used correctly, it can bend the strongest will to your side." As the day unfolded, Debra wove herself into the palace's web of alliances. She whispered encouragement to ambitious courtiers, shared veiled threats with those resistant to her influence, and subtly exposed fractures within Veyra's inner circle. Every interaction, every charm-laden gesture was a move on a board of galactic chess. Yet even as she cultivated loyalty, betrayal lurked nearby. Late in the afternoon, a trusted aide, one she had considered steadfast, delivered a message in secrecy. It was not a simple note. It was a warning. Someone in her inner circle had been feeding intelligence to Veyr. Debra's lips curved in, a small, almost imperceptible smile. Betrayal was inevitable in a palace like this, and it was a tool she could wield as easily as her beauty or her wit. She would let the traitor think themselves clever, all while plotting the precise moment to turn their treachery to her advantage. That evening, Debra convened a clandestine council in the shadowed chambers beneath the palace, the walls pulsing faintly with alien bioluminescence. Around her, human and alien allies leaned in, eager yet wary, drawn to her charisma and strategic brilliance. "The throne is not won by force alone," Debra said, her voice a soft current that commanded attention. "It is won by knowing who to trust and when to betray. Our enemies will try to divide us, to make us doubt each other. But if we strike together with precision and patience, Andara will be ours." Eyes, human and alien alike, glimmered with tentative resolve. Even as murmurs of loyalty echoed through the chamber, Debra's mind remained sharp, analyzing every face, every hesitation, every flicker of thought. Allies were necessary, yes, but controllable allies were better. Outside the chamber, the palace pulsed with intrigue. Veyr's spies were everywhere, shadows moving in the corridors, and yet Debra moved like a specter of light through the darkness. She had turned the first corner of the game, and already fractures began to form among her enemies. By the time the sun had dipped behind Andara's twin moons, Debra allowed herself a private moment in the palace's quiet gardens. The soft hum of alien flora surrounded her, the scent of bioluminescent blossoms thick in the air. Her reflection in the mirrored water was flawless, radiant, her beauty a weapon, her intelligence a shield, her ambition a blade. She whispered to herself, almost a vow, "I will bend this court to my will. Every whisper, every loyalty, every betrayal, they will pave the way to the throne." And as the twin moons rose, casting long shadows across the palace walls, Debra Solari, radiant, ruthless, irresistible, prepared for the battles yet to come. The palace at night was a living organism. Shadows slithered along crystalline walls. Whispering corridors carried secrets like currents through water, and the faint hum of energy fields thrummed beneath the floors. Debra Solari moved silently, her silver hair catching the faint bioluminescent glow of the palace's veins. Every step was deliberate, every sense alert. She had survived political maneuvering, assassins, and subtle betrayals, but Andara still had hidden layers that even the most careful eyes overlooked. Her destination was a legend whispered among the palace staff, a labyrinth of tunnels, passages, and hidden chambers beneath the palace, some centuries old, others carved by alien engineers to conceal intelligence, secrets, and treasures. To control the court, Debra knew, one must control the unseen veins of power. A quiet servant, eyes downcast, guided her to a side chamber near the palace's lower spires. The door was unmarked, blending seamlessly into the crystalline walls. The servant's fingers trembled as he activated the panel, revealing a stairwell descending into shadow. "You should not be here, Lady Solari," he murmured, voice barely audible. "This place, it is dangerous." Debra's emerald eyes glimmered. "Danger is merely opportunity in disguise," she whispered back. Her hand brushed his cheek, a fleeting, disarming gesture, and the servant flinched, retreating to the shadows. She was alone. Perfect. The stairwell opened into a corridor lined with shimmering panels, each displaying the faint traces of energy fields and hidden passageways. Debra activated her personal interface, sending a delicate pulse of neural energy through the panels. The labyrinth responded, mapping itself in her mind like veins in a living organism. Her first discovery was subtle but critical: a network of hidden intelligence nodes. These nodes recorded conversations, intercepted communications, and monitored the palace's movements. Debra's lips curved into a faint smile. Here she could see the whispers of allies and enemies alike, uncover plans before they were executed, and manipulate the flow of information to her advantage. She moved deeper into the labyrinth, navigating twisting tunnels that opened onto secret observation chambers overlooking council rooms, private chambers, and even Veyra's personal study. Each step brought her closer to understanding the palace's vulnerabilities and the strengths she could exploit. Yet the labyrinth was not unguarded. A series of silent alarms, subtle but precise, tested her every instinct. Debra moved with predatory grace, avoiding sensors, disabling traps with a combination of technical skill and intuition. Her movements were a dance, her beauty and elegance hidden beneath the practical layers of her tunic. Here, charm mattered less than precision, intelligence and nerve, and Debra possessed all three in abundance. At the heart of the labyrinth, she discovered a chamber filled with floating holographic maps, data streams, and encrypted files. Debra's eyes glimmered with triumph. She had uncovered a treasure trove of secrets. Here were records of Veyra's alliances, weaknesses among the nobility, and hidden factions of spies loyal to no one but the throne. Each piece of information was a thread she could pull, a weapon she could wield. But the labyrinth had one final test. A silent, shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, moving with the fluidity of a predator. Debra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with exhilaration. The assassin's presence confirmed her suspicions. Someone knew of her intrusion, yet she was ready. With a flick of her wrist, a holographic decoy shimmered into existence, diverting the intruder's attention. As the figure lunged, Debra slipped into the shadows, using her knowledge of the labyrinth to vanish, re-emerging behind a concealed panel. With a precise strike, she disabled the intruder, leaving them unconscious but alive. A message, not a murder. Breathing softly, Debra allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She now held the palace's secrets in her hands. The labyrinth had revealed its truths, and with them her path to power became clearer, sharper, and more lethal. Emerging from the hidden corridors, she ascended into the palace halls above, her eyes glimmering with purpose. Allies would be cultivated, enemies manipulated, and the throne would not remain beyond her grasp. Every whisper she had heard, every shadow she had seen, every secret she now possessed was a weapon in the grand game she intended to win. And as Andara's twin moons rose high in the sky, casting silver light across the palace, Debra Solari, radiant, brilliant, and utterly untouchable, smiled. The labyrinth had revealed its secrets, and she intended to use them all. The council chamber was empty, save for the polished crystalline table at its center, bathed in the ethereal glow of suspended luminescent orbs. Debra Solari stepped in, quietly, her silver hair catching the soft light, her emerald eyes alert, sharp, and calculating. Across the room, Lord Veyr awaited, his form as imposing and perfectly composed as the rumors had promised. His scaled skin shimmered like obsidian under the lights. His eyes, dark, fathomless pools, locked onto hers with unnerving intensity. "You've ventured far, Lady Solari," Veyr said, his voice smooth, layered with centuries of discipline and subtle threat. "But how much do you truly understand of the court you wish to command?" Debra inclined her head slightly, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "Understanding is the first step toward influence, Lord Veyr. And influence, as you well know, is often more powerful than brute force." He gestured toward two crystalline chairs at the head of the table. "Shall we see how that influence fares in a more direct manner, Debra sat with poise, every movement deliberate, every gesture radiating calm command. Ver extended his hand, activating the neural interface embedded in the table. Tendrils of faint light spiraled upward, connecting to their temples. The room seemed to fall away. They were alone in a shared psychic space, a battlefield of thought, perception, and strategy. Images of the palace, the city, and countless hidden corridors flashed around them, projections of intelligence filtered through centuries of Ver's power and Debra's cunning. Here, words were weapons and thoughts were shields. Ver struck first, probing her mind with subtle, razor-sharp threads of influence. "You think yourself prepared," he said within the psychic realm, "but you underestimate the centuries of tradition that bind this court. Your charm is but a candle against the sun." Debra's mind responded in kind, weaving intricate mental defenses while sending precise tendrils of her own. She felt his probing questions, his subtle attempts to uncover her motives, and countered, each with a delicate balance of truth and deception. "You rely too heavily on fear," she whispered in the shared space, a silken echo that carried both challenge and amusement. "Allies can be guided by fear, but loyalty is born of vision. I see paths you cannot veer." Images shifted violently as Ver attempted to manipulate her perception, creating illusions of betrayal and danger. Debra's pulse quickened, but she remained composed, twisting the illusions back upon him. A phantasm of one of his trusted advisors appeared, whispering of treachery that did not exist. Ver's eyes in the real world flickered ever so slightly. The smallest crack in his centuries honed control. For hours they battled silently, neither using weapons, both wielding intellect and perception. Every subtle move, every flicker of thought, carried potential consequences in the waking world. A misstep could mean political ruin, exile, or death. Then, with a final deliberate shift, Debra released a stream of psychic threads, weaving them into a pattern that highlighted the palace's fractures, his allies' hidden ambitions, and the subtle loyalties she had already begun to cultivate. Ver's defenses strained against the unexpected clarity, and for the first time he hesitated. "You are formidable," he admitted in the psychic space, a note of respect threading his words. "Perhaps more than I anticipated." Debra's smile was soft but sharp, a blade wrapped in silk. "Formidable enough to survive this court, and perhaps one day to reshape it." The interface disconnected with a soft hum, and the chamber returned to its physical reality. Ver's scaled features were inscrutable once more, but the faint tension in his posture betrayed the recognition that Debra Solari was not a mere interloper. She was a force, brilliant, alluring, and terrifyingly clever. Rising from her seat, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. Outside the chamber, the palace continued its hum of whispered alliances and concealed agendas, unaware that one of its most cunning intruders had just claimed a decisive advantage. Debra's emerald eyes gleamed with anticipation. The duel of minds had ended in a subtle victory, a shift in perception that would ripple through every corner of the court. The game of thrones, of whispers, and of shadows had escalated, and Debra Solari was no longer merely a player. She was the storm, gathering in the heart of Andara. The streets of Veyrathis had never seemed so alive. By day the city shimmered with crystalline spires, hovering craft, and the muted hum of alien energy. By night it pulsed with a more dangerous vitality, whispers of dissent, secret meetings, in hidden alcoves, and the faint scent of rebellion threading through the air. Debra Solari walked among it all, radiant in her silver-plated tunic, her emerald eyes scanning, calculating, and observing. Her beauty was a weapon, her elegance a shield, but tonight it was her intellect that carried the heaviest edge. The assassination attempt at the gala had been a spark. She intended to fan it into a controlled blaze. The palace's weaknesses were now clear. the fractures in loyalty exposed, and the seeds of her influence taking root. She entered a narrow alley, tucked between two towers where human dissenters waited. Their faces were a mixture of awe and nervous excitement as they recognized her. The youngest of them, barely more than a boy, swallowed hard. "Lady Solari, we've heard rumors about what you can do." Debra's smile was soft, yet precise, like sunlight refracted through crystal. "Rumors are often true," she murmured, "but only action can turn them into reality. Tonight you will act, and the palace will begin to feel the cracks I have uncovered." She guided them to a concealed network of supply tunnels beneath the city, ancient pathways that had once served as escape routes and secret trade channels. Debra had discovered them in her explorations of the labyrinth, memorizing every curve, every hidden sensor, every pressure-sensitive tile. Here, her enemy's power could be challenged without risk of immediate retaliation. Her plan was audacious. Small, precise acts of sabotage, coordinated with whispers to stir mistrust among Veyra's nobles. A shipment of rare minerals redirected to a rival faction, communications intercepted to sow confusion, and rumors carefully seeded to make trusted advisors question one another. Every action was calculated to destabilize without triggering open war, yet close enough to push the court toward chaos. Hours passed as Debra orchestrated the movements with the finesse of a conductor, her commands barely audible, yet carried with an authority that brooked no hesitation. The dissidents, inspired by her presence and confidence, executed their tasks with precision, leaving barely a trace of their intervention. And yet rebellion was not merely mechanical, it was a dance of perception and psychology. Debra paused, allowing a moment to observe the subtle tremors of tension radiating from the palace above. She knew Veyra's spies would notice discrepancies in reports, discrepancies she had deliberately left, and the seeds of suspicion would grow. Allies would turn uncertain, loyalists would hesitate, and her influence would spread like wildfire through the corridors of power. Then came the whisper she had anticipated. A warning slipped through the neural network she had discreetly tapped. Veyra was aware of the disturbances. He was moving, assessing, preparing to strike. Debra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but exhilaration. This was the heart of the game, danger interwoven with opportunity. She allowed herself a small, victorious smile. "Let them come," she whispered to the shadows. "Every step they take, I will anticipate. Every plan, I will counter. Every doubt, I will exploit." The first sparks of visible rebellion appeared as night fell fully over the city. Firelights. In distant alleys, the hushed excitement of conspirators testing their courage, and the ripple of tension through the palace, as advisors whispered warnings to one another. Debra watched it all unfold, invisible and untouchable, a conductor of chaos whose elegance made her presence unforgettable. By the time Andara's twin moons reached their zenith, the city was alive with subtle revolt. Nothing had been destroyed, yet everything had shifted: perception, loyalty, and power. Veyra would feel it first in the uncertainty of his closest allies, then in the widening cracks across his court. Debra retreated to a high balcony overlooking the city, the cool night, wind tugging at her silver hair. She gazed down at the labyrinth of spires and glowing streets, her emerald eyes alight with ambition. The flames of rebellion were no longer a threat. They were her tools, her message, and her advantage. And as the city hummed with tension, Debra Solari, radiant, cunning, and unstoppable, allowed herself a rare, private thrill. The game of Andara was no longer theoretical. The pieces were moving, the board was alive, and the throne was drawing nearer. The palace of Veyrathis had never felt more treacherous. Even the crystalline walls seemed to pulse with suspicion, each corridor whispering secrets only the daring, or the foolish, would pursue. Debra Solari moved through the palace with a predator's elegance, every step deliberate, her emerald eyes scanning for threats and opportunities alike. The flames of rebellion she had ignited were spreading, but not all fires burned in her favor. Inside her private council chamber, hidden beneath layers of bioluminescent crystal, her closest allies waited, human and alien alike, but the atmosphere was taut, electric with unease. One of her Nisari allies, the violet-skinned emissary she had begun to trust, avoided her gaze. The youngest human conspirator fidgeted nervously, as if hiding a secret behind trembling hands. Debra's gaze swept across the room. She could feel it, shadows of betrayal threading through her inner circle like venom in blood. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Treachery was inevitable in any court, but it was also a tool, if handled correctly. Someone here has been less than forthcoming, she said softly, her voice smooth as silk, yet carrying the weight of sharp command. Secrets are dangerous, especially when they are hidden from those who need to know. The room stiffened, whispers died. The Nisari emissary's eyes flickered, betraying the smallest fraction of panic. Debra leaned forward, letting her presence fill the chamber, her beauty and authority weaving a web that drew every gaze toward her. Loyalty is not merely a word, she continued. It is an action, and betrayal. Betrayal is a blade that can cut either way depending on who wields it. A human aide dared to speak, his voice tentative. Lady Solari, You may speak, she said, her emerald eyes piercing through the dim light. But speak only truth. It was then that the warning arrived, a subtle signal transmitted through the neural interface she had embedded in the labyrinth. A faction within her human allies had been feeding information to Veyr's spies, seeking to gain favor in the chaos she had orchestrated. Debra's lips curved into a cold, precise smile. Perfect. A test. Very well, she said softly, almost theatrically. Let us see how deep this loyalty runs. She moved among them like liquid silver, her hand brushing against the shoulder of the guilty Nisari. A faint psychic pulse, imperceptible to the others, struck the traitor with clarity. Truth and fear combined. Undeniable. The emissary's breath caught, eyes widening, but Debra held their gaze with a predatory calm. You have choices, she whispered in the space between mind and soul. You may continue to serve me faithfully, or you may choose the path of fools, and discover how quickly the labyrinth can claim the unwise. The traitors sank to their knees, a silent submission that sent a ripple through the room. Debra's other allies, human and alien, shared glances, some relieved, some wary, but none dared challenge her authority. She had turned treachery into spectacle, fear into obedience, and suspicion into leverage. Yet Debra knew the battle was far from over. The flames of rebellion were spreading beyond the palace's walls, and Veyr himself was no longer a distant figure of authority. He was moving, adapting, testing, probing, seeking weaknesses that she could not afford to expose. Stepping to the balcony overlooking the city, Debra allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The twin moons cast silver shadows across Veyrathis, the glowing streets alive with tension, the whispers of conspirators threading through alleyways and hidden passages. Every spark of rebellion, every secret, every betrayal was part of the grand design she had set in motion. But she knew that one wrong move could collapse everything. Her emerald eyes glimmered with resolve. The court is alive with shadows, she whispered, and I will command them all. Loyalty, betrayal, fear, ambition, each is a piece of the game, and I will win. As the night deepened, Debra Solari, radiant, cunning, and unstoppable, stood as both a storm and its eye. Shadows of treachery would rise, but every blade thrown against her would either bend to her will or break. The court had learned one undeniable truth: to underestimate her was to invite ruin. Veyrathis had never known a night like this. The palace, a glittering cathedral of crystal spires and bioluminescent veins, pulsed with tension as if it sensed the storm brewing within. Debra Solari moved silently through the hallways, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid light, her emerald eyes scanning for every detail, every shadow, every potential threat or opportunity. The labyrinth, the rebellion, the traitors, they had all led to this moment. Tonight, she would strike at the heart of power. Her allies, humans and aliens alike, were strategically positioned throughout the palace. Each loyalist knew their role: to intercept communications, sabotage key operations, and manipulate the perceptions of Veyra's court. Small, calculated acts of chaos would converge into a symphony of destabilization. Debra had orchestrated this meticulously. Every whisper, every misdirection, every seemingly minor act would fracture the palace's authority from within. Yet she was aware that the greatest danger was Veyra himself. The Lord of Andara was not merely a ruler, he was a strategist, a predator of unmatched intellect. Debra had felt his mind probing, challenging her in the psychic duels that had become their secret battleground. Tonight he would test her resolve directly. She paused at the top of the grand staircase leading to Veyra's private chambers. From here she could see the entire central hall, its crystal floors reflecting the bioluminescent glow of the palace in fractal patterns. Courtiers moved through the hall like pieces on a chessboard, unaware that every move had been anticipated. Debra allowed herself a quiet, deliberate breath, feeling the pulse of the palace like a heartbeat she alone could read. She descended the stairs with predator-like grace, every movement a message to those watching. Elegance, authority, and lethal precision intertwined. Her first confrontation was subtle. A Nisari guard, loyal to Veyra, attempted to intercept her path. Debra's smile was soft, her presence magnetic. "I believe loyalty is a choice," she said, voice smooth as starlight. "Tonight, yours can serve a greater purpose." The guard hesitated, eyes flickering with uncertainty. In a fleeting psychic touch, she conveyed clarity, direction, and the undeniable logic of allegiance to her cause. The guard bowed slightly and stepped aside. Even the palace's defenders were beginning to bend. Inside the private chambers, Veyra awaited. He was a vision of controlled power, obsidian scales gleaming, eyes dark and fathomless. "Debra," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you have brought the palace to tremble, but how far are you willing to go?" Debra's smile was deliberate, a blend of charm and menace. "As far as necessary," she replied, "and as far as the throne will allow me to go." They circled one another, a predator and her rival, in a game of perception and subtle influence. Debra's mind raced, calculating his every possible counter, anticipating his strategies, and identifying fractures in his control. The siege was not merely physical, it was psychological. She unleashed waves of influence through the palaces, neural networks manipulating communications, planting false reports, and stoking distrust among Veyra's closest advisors. Confusion rippled through the palace, every decision delayed, every order questioned. Veyra's expression hardened. "You are clever, but cleverness alone cannot seize a throne." Debra's emerald eyes glimmered. "Perhaps, but cleverness, patience, and the ability to see the game from all angles, that can topple even the strongest ruler." Outside the chamber, chaos spread like wildfire. Courtiers whispered in uncertainty, guards miscommunicated, and the rebellion's flames, carefully controlled, erupted in strategic pockets throughout the palace. Debra's allies moved with precision, striking with subtlety, leaving disruption without revealing their hand. And in the center of it all stood Debra Solari, radiant, cunning, and unstoppable. The siege was more than rebellion. It was a demonstration of her intelligence, her charisma, and her power to manipulate even the most entrenched authority. Every whisper of doubt, every hesitation, every tiny fracture brought her closer to the throne. as the first light of Andara's twin moons illuminated the fractured city below, Debra allowed herself a fleeting, triumphant smile. The palace trembled, Veyr's authority wavered, and the pieces were finally falling into place. The siege within was not over, but its outcome was no longer uncertain. Debra Solari, radiant and unrelenting, had turned the palace itself into a weapon of influence, and the crown of Andara was within her reach. The palace of Veyrathis had become a landscape of calculated chaos. Crystalline corridors shimmered with the faint glow of disrupted energy networks, whispers of mistrust threaded through every hall, and loyalists and traitors alike moved uncertainly, questioning their own allegiances. At the heart of this controlled storm strode Debra Solari, radiant and untouchable, her silver hair flowing like molten light and her emerald eyes glinting with absolute certainty. Tonight the throne would belong to her, or fall in flames. Her allies had secured every critical point in the palace, the gates, the neural interfaces, and the council chambers. Subtle sabotage, careful whispers, and manipulated intelligence had weakened Veyr's authority to a fragile, trembling shell. Yet Debra knew the final step required more than strategy. It demanded confrontation, brilliance, and unyielding courage. She approached the grand hall where Veyr's throne waited, an imposing structure of obsidian crystal that reflected the fractured light of the palace. Lord Veyr stood before it, calm but tense, his obsidian scales glinting in the luminescent glow. His dark eyes held a storm of calculation, admiration, and barely concealed caution. "You've come far," he said, his voice resonant, echoing through the chamber. "But the throne is not merely a prize, it is a trial, and trials test more than cleverness." Debra's smile was soft, magnetic, yet edged with steel. "I have survived trials you cannot even imagine," she replied, stepping forward with deliberate elegance. "I have mastered the labyrinth, turned rebellion into strategy, and untangled the web of betrayal that surrounds this court. The throne is not a test for me, Veyr. It is recognition of what I have already earned." He gestured toward the throne, the obsidian crystal glimmering like a predator's eye. "Then claim it," he said, "but understand, every move you make will echo in this palace, in every mind, for centuries." Debra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with exhilaration. The culmination of years of planning, patience, and subtle manipulation had led her to this moment. She moved toward the throne, her presence magnetic, commanding, intoxicating. Every step was precise, a statement of dominance and allure. Veyr did not strike immediately. Instead, he unleashed the final psychic challenge, a storm of perception, designed to test her focus, her will, and her ability to see through illusion. The palace itself seemed to distort. The walls shimmered, courtiers' faces twisted into phantoms, and the very air hummed with latent energy. Debra's mind, honed by countless duels of intellect and strategy, adapted instantly. She wove clarity through chaos, untangling the illusions, anticipating his manipulations, and turning his psychic assaults into mirrors reflecting his own doubts and fears. Every thought he sent at her returned as a weapon of influence, a subtle force bending the palace's reality to her will. The throne loomed closer, a monolith of power and authority. Debra's hand brushed the obsidian crystal, and a surge of energy pulsed through her, the palace itself acknowledging her dominion. Veyr's eyes widened slightly, the first visible crack in his composed demeanor. "I yield," he said, his voice low, tinged with respect and resignation. "You have mastered the court and the game of Andara. The throne is yours, Debra Solari." A faint, triumphant smile curved her lips. She seated herself with elegance, letting the weight of victory settle over her. The palace seemed to breathe around her, shadows bending to her presence, the murmurs of conspirators and loyalists alike acknowledging her assent. Yet Debra's mind remained sharp. The throne was more than a seat of power. It was a nexus of responsibility, danger, and endless intrigue. Every whisper, every shadow, every potential betrayal would now pass beneath her gaze. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, letting the twin moons of Endara cast silver light across the crystalline halls, her emerald eyes glowing with certainty and ambition. She rose, standing before her court, radiant and unchallenged. "The palace has been tested, its loyalties examined, and its shadows laid bare," she proclaimed. "Endara now moves forward under a single vision, a single will. We are no longer divided by fear, ambition, or secrecy. From this throne, we shape the future, together." Applause, cautious yet growing, echoed through the hall. Allies and former skeptics alike bowed in recognition, drawn by her presence, her brilliance, and her undeniable command. Debra Solari, the woman who had conquered labyrinths, manipulated rebellions, outwitted traitors, and bested a legendary ruler, had claimed her destiny. The throne awaited, but so too did endless challenges, whispers, and the constant dance of power. She was radiant, cunning, and unstoppable, and the world of Endara would bend to her vision. Above, the twin moons glimmered in the sky, casting silver shadows that flickered over the palace. Debra's gaze swept across the city and beyond, Queen already envisioning the future she would command. The game was far from over, but victory had never looked so brilliant. The throne of Veyrathis was cold beneath Debra Solari's hands, yet it radiated a quiet, commanding energy, an affirmation of power earned through cunning, ambition, and relentless intellect. From this seat she could see everything: the corridors of the palace, the whispering courtiers, the glimmering streets of the city below, and the pulse of rebellion she had transformed into loyalty. Yet even in triumph, she knew that control was fragile, that shadows lingered in every corner, and that the crown was both a weapon and a burden. The palace was a living organism now, breathing with the rhythm of her rule. Yet within the crystalline walls, subtle fractures persisted: a whispered conspiracy among alien factions, a human loyalist questioning his allegiance, and remnants of Veyra's influence still lingered. Power, she had learned, was never fully possessed. It was seized moment by moment, negotiated in whispers, and maintained through vigilance. Debra rose from the throne and walked through the grand hall, her silver hair glinting in the moonlight, streaming through the crystal arches. Her presence commanded attention without a word. Her beauty, radiant yet purposeful, drew eyes and loyalty alike. Courtiers bowed, their whispers carefully controlled, but she felt every hidden glance, every unspoken doubt. She paused at a secluded balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons bathed Veyrathis in silver light, illuminating the streets and spires, revealing both the glory and fragility of her dominion. Below, subtle movements hinted at pockets of unrest, small but persistent. Debra allowed herself a quiet smile. The city was alive, vibrant, unpredictable, and, under her influence, malleable. A soft signal from her neural interface alerted her. To a subtle disturbance, an insider within her inner circle had been contacted by remnants of Veyra's spies, a test of loyalty, a spark of potential betrayal. Debra's emerald eyes glimmered with predatory clarity. She had learned to turn treachery into advantage, to convert uncertainty into leverage, and to anticipate the movements of both friend and foe. Summoning her closest advisors, she convened a private council. Humans and aliens alike gathered, tense but attentive, knowing her brilliance and ruthlessness were equal. Debra spoke with deliberate cadence, weaving authority and charm into every word. "There are shadows within our midst," she said, eyes sweeping the room, every gaze held, every mind engaged. "But shadows are only dangerous when left unchecked. Today we illuminate them, and we turn them into instruments of our strength." With precision, she revealed the attempted communication with her inner circle, exposing the would-be betrayer while offering a path to redemption. The lesson was clear. Loyalty was rewarded, deception punished, and the web of influence extended in every direction. The council adjourned, leaving Debra alone in the throne room. She traced her fingers along the crystalline edges of the throne, feeling the power of her conquest settle into her bones. Yet she did not revel in victory. She calculated, planned, and envisioned the next phase. Power was a living entity, shifting and demanding constant engagement. Through the city, subtle signals were broadcast, reassuring loyalists, intimidating potential dissenters, and manipulating perception with the finesse of a master strategist. Each whisper, each act of influence reinforced her authority, transforming fear and respect into obedience and admiration. Debra allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The path she had walked from labyrinthine corridors of secrets through rebellion and psychic duels to this seat of dominion had forged her into more than a ruler. She was a force, radiant, brilliant, unrelenting, and utterly untouchable. Yet she knew the crown was both a shield and a target, and that every shadow in her palace could become a threat. The twin moons of Andara climbed high in the night sky, silver light spilling across the city and the palace. Debra's emerald eyes glimmered as she surveyed her realm. The reign of shadows had begun, not as a reign of terror, but as a reign of control, vision, and unmatched cunning. And in the quiet heart of her power, she allowed herself a subtle, victorious smile. Debra Solari, conqueror, strategist, and sovereign, was no longer merely a player in the game of Andara. She was its master. And the shadows that moved against her would learn that even darkness bends before brilliance, ambition, and will. This chapter establishes Debra's consolidation of power, showing her handling lingering threats, internal treachery, and the subtle orchestration of the city and court. It emphasizes her intelligence, elegance, and unwavering control, while leaving space for ongoing intrigue under her rule. The dawn over Veyrathis was unlike any the city had ever seen. Twin suns rose in the eastern sky, casting molten light over crystal towers and shimmering streets. The city itself seemed to exhale, the tension of decades dissolving into the quiet brilliance of a new era. And at the heart of this awakening sat Debra Solari, radiant, poised, and absolute, upon the obsidian throne she had claimed with intellect, cunning, and indomitable will. The palace, now fully under her influence, pulsed with organized energy. Every whisper, every flicker of suspicion had been neutralized or converted into leverage. Even remnants of Veyra's loyalists had bent to her authority, either through persuasion, intimidation, or awe of her sheer presence. Debra's beauty, her magnetic elegance, and the brilliance of her mind had proven a weapon as formidable as any army. From her vantage on the throne, she surveyed the sprawling city below. Caravans of alien merchants moved beside human traders, and hovercraft traced glowing arcs through the skies. Andara, fractured and divided for centuries, was now poised to unify under her vision. Yet Debra knew that true power was not measured in territory, but in the loyalty, fear, and ambition of those who served and opposed her. A gentle knock echoed in the throne room. One of her most trusted allies, a former conspirator turned confidant, entered, bearing intelligence from distant provinces. Debra's emerald eyes scanned the report swiftly, noting signs of unrest, minor rebellions yet to be quelled, and opportunities to consolidate further. Her fingers traced the edge of the throne, and a faint smile played upon her lips. Every challenge was a tool, every threat a stepping stone. "You've secured the palace," her confidant said cautiously, "but what of the outer provinces, the resistance in the northern territories?" Debra rose, moving gracefully from the throne, her silver hair catching the light like flowing Starlight. "The outer territories are not enemies," she said softly, yet firmly. "They are pieces on the board. They can be guided, influenced, and shaped, and those who resist will learn that even the smallest shadow bends before brilliance, ambition, and will." Her presence radiated calm authority. Courtiers, advisors, and allies alike watched in awe, sensing the quiet force that made Debra Solari unstoppable. She had not merely claimed a throne, she had claimed perception, loyalty, and fear, bending them all into instruments of her vision. The halls of the palace, once echoing with whispers of treachery and rebellion, now thrummed with coordinated purpose. Debra moved among her council, her voice both commanding and inspiring, guiding decisions with precision and foresight. Every choice reinforced her dominion, every subtle act strengthened her position. Yet even in this triumph, Debra allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had risen from the shadows of intrigue, through psychic duels and orchestrated rebellion, to claim a throne that had eluded rulers for centuries. Her journey had been forged in brilliance, beauty, and unyielding ambition. And now, as sovereign of Andara, she understood the true nature of power. It was a living, breathing entity, demanding constant attention, foresight, and cunning. The twin suns reached their zenith, bathing the palace and city in golden light. Debra's gaze swept across the horizon, emerald eyes blazing with purpose. The crown was secured, yet the game of Andara would never truly end. She would face challenges, betrayals, and tests, but they were now hers to master, to manipulate, and to command. As she returned to the obsidian throne, her silhouette bathed in light, she allowed herself a rare, private triumph. The whispers of Andara's past rulers, of traitors and heroes alike, seemed to fall silent in recognition. Debra Solari, radiant, cunning, and unassailable, had claimed her destiny. And in the quiet heart of the palace, with the city alive, beneath her and the twin suns casting silver and gold across crystalline spires, she spoke softly to herself, a promise as much as a declaration. The crown is secured, and so too is the future, my future and Andara's, because I am its storm, its light, and its ruler. The palace exhaled in acknowledgment, shadows bending before her presence. Debra Solari sat, unchallenged, radiant and eternal, a sovereign. In the truest sense, a woman whose ambition and brilliance would shape Andara for generations to come.